aside from Kishon Khan and Deli Sasimi, you've worked with a broad spectrum of artists, from Tony Allen to Damon Albarn and Osvaldo Chacon. How have these diverse associations shaped your approach to your music?
I think they've kind of filled in the gaps in a way. You know, because I was very much interested in, when I met Kishon, 21 years ago, we were doing a band that was very much playing with African music, playing around with African music, playing around with Latin music, playing around with reggae, all of these things, And I had been, although I had heard elements of these music, I was still very much immersed in the jazz thing. So it was important to me, and I think it's important in terms of the projects that I've kind of ended up doing, where there's a lot of trying to cross things over, to make sure that I really did understand those musics. So a lot of the other work that I've done outside of those two bands has been to sort of further my knowledge, I suppose, in a way of the musics that I'm playing. So I've played with a lot of the different Afrobeat artists that are based in the UK. Well, obviously Tony I've worked with in different ways. He sat in with Delo's band as a guest, but I have done his own gig as well a couple of times. So I've recorded with Bucky Leo, a guy called Enemo. I was in the band of a guy called Mamadi Kamari for a while. It was all kind of to sort of further my understanding of the music that I was playing. Because obviously with Dele I was getting very, very a specific training in that kind of Afrobeat. So it was nice to go into some other African bands and either have a different approach to Afrobeat or other African musics, which because obviously those other African musics have informed the creation of Afrobeat as well. Afrobeat came out of older African music traditions meeting funk, so it was quite important for me to understand those older African influences, as well as I'd done funk. I'd done a lot of funk playing, so I kind of got funk. So it was filling in the gaps in a way, and the same with the Cuban stuff. Was very much like, actually, it'd be great for me to play in a proper timber band. Osvaldo Chacon, you mentioned there, he was one of the, back in Cuba, was in a band called Bamboleo, which is one of the big sort of timber bands. He's a proper timber singer, and his arrangements are completely from that style. So I learned a lot about that music by playing with him.
You've been around, done a lot, and seen a lot on the music scene, especially with regard to jazz and world music.
Yeah.
What are your impressions of today's jazz and world music scene?
I think today's jazz, the world music scene, let me start with the jazz scene. I think today's jazz music scene is very exciting. I think there was possibly a period, maybe in the 80s, sort of 80s and early 90s, where it's perhaps slightly lost its way. I don't know, maybe that's not fair to say that, but I think the legacy of Coltrane, and it's a big shadow. I think that's part of when I said earlier that I didn't necessarily see myself in that scene. It wasn't necessarily, I love jazz music, but I was like, I can't do, because it was the jams I went to were very much doing that swing thing. I was like, well, have I got anything to say here that's different or better, and preferably better, or at least at the level of what Curtis Fuller said, or what J.J. Johnson said, or what, and that's the thing, is like, especially I don't know how you can be a jazz saxophonist, living under the shadow of Coltrane and Wayne Shorter and, Cannibal Adderley and all those guys. It must be it's like a monumental task to sort of come out from underneath that shadow, So I think possibly, there was obviously the big fusion movement of the 70s, but I think possibly in the 80s the jazz scene was slightly like, okay, where are we going to go? What's the new direction for this? I kind of feel that's just my perception. Maybe I'm wrong, but I sort of feel like in the last few years there's been a whole crop of really interesting young musicians come through who've maybe almost gone past that shadow, and they're still checking out all the music, but actually they're maybe not feeling the weight of it in the same way. I don't know. Maybe that's wrong, but certainly there seems to be some very talented young musicians coming through, and the jazz scene seems to be quite experimental at the moment, with people trying all sorts of exciting things. I don't know whether it's been going on, I suppose, for the last 10-15 years, with bands like Polar Bear and those guys, and then there are people like Shabaka Hutchins who's doing really interesting stuff. So there's a whole crop of younger musicians. I'll say not young necessarily, but younger musicians coming through who seem to be embracing playing around with the genre. I saw Shabaka at the Shambhala Festival the other day, actually, doing a project with it was kind of it was really like with just him, drums and a keyboard player, doing kind of almost sort of dance music in a way, but with that sort of jazz under. Again, it's like an undertone rather than necessarily the whole kind of thing, and he's obviously been experimenting with the South African thing as well. But yeah, so I think the jazz scene's in a very healthy place at the moment, and I don't know whether, because obviously there's a lot of colleges now that are doing jazz courses, and so that perhaps that's helped in some ways to sort of reinvigorate the scene, and certainly there's some high quality players coming through. The world music scene is a more complicated one, I think. Afrobeat, I think, is flourishing at the moment. Partly I think because of the influence of the Fella Show, and the fact that a lot of big names got behind the Fella Show. It was written by the Antibalas, the Afrobeat band based in New York. But they basically, it was a very powerful show, and obviously a very powerful show about sort of black rights and black, and that kind of thing, and just thinking about that whole kind of thing, and so a lot of big names, people like Beyonce, she was a fan of it. Will Smith, was a big fan of it. So some big name people got behind that show, and as a result, gave it this. I don't think that was just a part of it, but I think it probably helped. Gave it this momentum. I was involved with the show that they did in the National Theatre here, we played how many? We did 3 months playing 6-7 times a week, and it was packed, every night. And that's pretty impressive, really, for a show about the life of a rebel musician who was very anti the system. And there's nothing. It's not a West End show, but actually it was. So I think that's been quite. I think that's had an influence, certainly on Afrobeat going through a bit of a renaissance at the moment. So it's a good time to be an Afrobeat musician. And luckily, I'm playing with Dele, who's very much one of the sort of senior figures in that scene, really. So it's good. We're having good times. Other scenes are suffering a bit more. The Cuban scene, although actually there's a good friend of mine called Oresta Noda who's just started a night called Sambroso, which regularly at the Forge in Camden, who's kind of made a little home for the Cuban scene, and that's really flourishing, actually. So there are little pockets of the Latin scene, Cuban scene stuff, kind of reinventing itself in a way and coming to life again. There was a period, sadly, partly because of Buena Vista Social Club, because ironically, even though the album did a massive amount to draw people's attention to Cuban music, it drew attention to people's Cuban music from 50 years ago, and there was all the bands that were kind of doing more modern, like the Timber stuff and beyond, there was like, no, but we want this, we want Buena Vista Social Club. It's like, well, that's fine, but that's kind of not what we're doing, So there was a lot of pressure to play that thing, and if you weren't playing that, then at least do something that play the stuff that the DJs were playing for dance classes, which the Cubans don't play that music anymore. The Cubans here, that we play with here joke about the fact that they never played One Ton of Mirror so many times as when they came here. So it's so for a period that, and also the problem with a lot of these musics, the problem with Afrobeat, and the problem with Cuban music is the bands are big. If you want to play that music properly, you need a 4-piece horn section, and so obviously that you're always fighting the battle of how commercial is this versus how expensive is it with such a big band. So the Cuban scene, I think, it suffered for a while, or the Latin scene in general suffered for a while, having been quite big. Maybe sort of 20 years ago, it did sort of have a bit of a slump. But I think, as I say, there are little pockets of, particularly people like the Sambroso thing at the Forge, who are really trying to push it forward again. And there's a younger crowd who is suddenly, maybe discovering this music for the first time and thought, well, yeah, this is great, So, there's a new energy, I think, in that scene. I think there are other scenes, I don't know what one calls reggae. Reggae doesn't kind of sometimes get considered world music, but it's just as much world music as anything else. But that's kind of, I think reggae's kind of still ticks over, but maybe also could do with a bit of a renaissance. But yeah.
What advice would you give to a young person picking up the trombone for the first time?
Wow, what advice would I give them? Practice. Yeah. No, I mean it's there's a lot of, I think programs like X Factor and all this kind of thing. There's a lot of attention and emphasis put on being discovered. Like, oh, you can have this magic moment where a Simon Cowell will walk into your bedroom and you'll go from singing in the shower to singing on a massive stage in front of thousands of people. The reality of the music scene is for the most part nothing like that, and actually most musicians, including, and I include the quality pop musicians, have gone through hard graft for many years to get good at their craft. And I think that sometimes doesn't get talked about enough. The fact that actually we put a lot of hours in to developing our music. It was an interesting article from Will Young, actually, I read a few years ago, where he said he almost had to reject the success he got from Pop Idol because he didn't feel like he was actually ready to be that high up, because he hadn't done enough gigs, and he actually he sort of disappeared for a while, and he said he literally went back to doing pub gigs in South London for a few years because he felt that he had stuff to learn in terms of learning his craft, and then he came, obviously Pop Idol helped him as well because he then was able to step back into the limelight, but he felt that he needed to sort of step back for a while and get an experience that he didn't yet have, So I think that's the thing I would say to any musician, trombone or whatever you are, is that actually don't underestimate that, their talent will get you so far, but hard work will get you further.
When can we expect to see you performing tracks from No Confusion on the live circuit?
The next gig we've got is Keisha and I, as you mentioned earlier, we started our record label Funky Walla. We're doing a Funky Walla party on November the 18th at the Forge as part of the London Jazz Festival. It'll be kind of showcasing a few of the projects that are on our label or are about to be on our label. So there'll be a set of my stuff. Hopefully there'll be a set. I think there's going to be a set of Cube Afrobeat, which is a project that we're mixing between Lockie Terror, Keyshawn's band Lockie Terror, and Dele Shasimi is going to be. So it's a kind of a mixture of the Cuban and Afrobeat worlds. A band called Cube Afrobeat. So we'll probably be showcasing a bit of that as well. Hopefully we're going to start recording that quite soon. I'm not sure who else is on the program yet. That's one, but there'll be a few acts going through the night. But my band will be playing on that, and then after that, I may have some stuff, but I've got a few gigs that I'm trying to get together in March. So kind of watch this space. I've got some confirmed in the middle of March, but trying to get a little tour together.
2017.
Yeah.
We look forward to that, Justin.
Thank you
very much for your time, and
thank you.
To the album doing the business on the circuit.
Thank you.